Mary Wollstonecraft and Her Legacy by Susan Manley. So Mary Wollstonecraft was the famous 18th century British writer who is best known for her work in vindication of the rights of women, which she argued that women should be treated with equal dignity and respect, especially when it comes to education. And although she is generally regarded as a writer of great influence for the development of feminist political thought and the feminist analysis of literary representations of women, Mary Wollstonecraft's work remains controversial. Particularly, attention has been paid to her alleged rejection or suspicion of sexuality, imagination, and emotional expression. So, Cora Copeland summarizes the divergence of modern critical opinion on Wollstonecraft's life and work thus: was the erotic and effective imagination gendered or universal, a blessing or a curse for women? Was it indispensable to radical consciousness, irrefutably a part of human psychic life, or was it something that could and should be retrained? Gendered identity was largely a matter of social construction. Then could a brave new world reconstruct its unconscious as well as its conscious wishes? So Wollstonecraft struggled with these questions of identity, fantasy, and desire, and her work shows the fairness of the contest. Wollstonecraft's writings reflected the urgency and excitement and eventually the crushing despair felt by all those who wish for and asked to bring about a brave new world. And it prompted Wollstonecraft to experiments in her own life, her love affairs, her illegitimate child, her friendships with men, and her determination to live independently, as well as giving impetus to her ideas about female sexuality and sensibility, and women's status as writers, intellectuals, mothers, and citizens. So Ellen Showalter has defined late 20th century feminist literary criticism as developing out of two kinds of writing. In the first place, she suggests there is feminist critique, which focuses on the analysis of women as readers and as textual subjects, both male and female authored works. And also, Showalter identifies different kind of feminist critique in genocritics, which focuses on the theory and practice of women as writers, on woman as the producer of textual meaning. So next is Burke had identified the sublime with power, masculinity, and the experience of pain, while the beautiful was associated with weakness, femininity, and the expression of pleasure. So those virtues which cause admiration and are of the sublimer kind produce there rather than love. So Burke assumes that his readers and the man he describes are male, and repeatedly refers to the emotions aroused in heterosexual men by the female body and feminine behavior to explain the affective character of beauty. By beauty, I mean the quality or those qualities in bodies by which they can cause love. So this quality, where it is the highest in the female sex, always carries with it an idea of weakness and imperfection. So Wollstonecraft herself suggests that Burke's aesthetic categories already implicitly justifying and naturalizing the hierarchy of the powerful over the powerless, so become explicitly political in his reflections on the revolution in France. And also, she noticed how Burke uses courtly insincerity and unrestrained feelings to arouse a strong response in his readers and compares him to a celebrated beauty, so who is anxious to raise admiration on every occasion and excite emotion rather than the calm reciprocation of mutual esteem and unimpassioned respect. So Wollstonecraft represents herself as speaking with manly plainness, offering a manly definition of the rights of humanity and the liberty of reason. For Wollstonecraft, Burke is a stereotype feminine Eve figure, so she summarizes Burke's anti-revolutionary rhetoric as a ploy to tempt his readers into regarding unnatural customs as the sage fruit of experience, and uses a discourse of beauty to attach his readers to induce them to love the idea of inequality. So in her critique of artificiality and equality, the way this is propagated through literature is continued in the more famous Vindication of Rights of Women. So again, her target is Burke's philosophical inquiry and reflections, but Burke is joined by Milton and Rousseau as fellow authors of a fictitious femininity and patriarchal enemies in league against female liberation. In the Vindication of Rights of Men, Wollstonecraft had suggested the power of textual representation of women, blaming Burke's theory of beauty and sublimity for the behavior of ladies who have labored to be pretty by counterfeiting weakness, choosing not to cultivate with the moral virtues that might chance to excite respect and interfere with the pleasing sensation they were created to inspire. So in her introduction to the Vindication of Rights of Women, she likewise alleges that women have been corrupted and stunted by their reading, so which has enfeebled their minds with notions of false refinement, so a consequence not confined to those who read frivolous novels, also communicated through books of instruction written by men of genius. She therefore set out to construct a model of non-gendered identity, one which will ultimately benefit men as well as women, since she sees both as degraded by sexualized and oppositional models of identity. This Wollstonecraft is writing this time expressly as a woman, making her clear at the outset of the work, rather than implicitly assuming the masculine persona of the anonymously issued Vindication of the Rights of Men, but crucially, she represents writing the thinking as activities in which the body and its sex are transcended. For her, it seems necessary to assert this transcendence in order to reach beyond women's objectification and the idea that female subjectivity, conventionally defined by sexual submission, acceptance of intellectual inferiority, and delicate sensibility, was distinct from male subjectivity defined in diametrically opposed terms. So the point of Wollstonecraft's critique of women is that she is determined to reveal the fictionality of both femininity and masculinity, and indeed she calls the word masculine a bugbear or dislike. So the artificial weakness and inferiority usually associated with women has been communicated, and Wollstonecraft argues through literature. So women have been taught through their reading to use cunning, softness of temper, outward obedience, puerile kind of propriety to obtain male protection. So the first literary exemplar of this propagation of artificial femininity is Milton Eve, and it is through an interrogation of the description of Eve in Paradise Lost that Wollstonecraft focuses her critique of sexualized and gendered identity. As her first Vindication had argued, through virtue, through self-realization was only to be achieved through active independent thought. Wollstonecraft repeats the idea in her second Vindication, asserting it is a farce to call any being virtuous whose virtues do not result from the exercise of its own reason. Eliot notes that vague prejudice against Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Woman as a reprehensible book, and points out that in fact it is eminently serious and severely moral. So she praises Wollstonecraft for seeing a painting women as they are, and echoes her call for intellectual emancipation for both sexes. And compared with Eliot and Mel, Wollstonecraft's vision of women as creative, thinking, and aspirant being emerges as much more optimistic, even utopian, depending as it does not a conviction that sexual distinction is arbitrary, that this difference is eradicable, and that the most salutary effects tending to improve mankind might be expected from a revolution in female manners. Yet, despite her misgivings about the abuse of imagination and fantasy as conservative discourses tending to inhibit the progress of women, so Wollstonecraft too gestured towards a different kind of writing, a different kind of self-imagining, able to invent and encompass a future state beyond prison of sex. Precious specialty which there remains to be expressed. So in conclusion, in 1792, a vindication of rights of women considered her most important work, created a new wave of feminist sentiments. It argued that women ought to have an education commensurate with their position in society, and that they should not purely be viewed as an object of pleasure for men. While this publication attracted a lot of negative publicity at the time, it also received positive reviews and was even translated into French. So Mary Wollstonecraft was a radical in the sense that she desired to bridge the gap between mankind and present circumstances and ultimate perfection. She was truly a child of the French Revolution and saw a new age of reason and benevolence close at hand. Wollstonecraft undertook the task of helping women to achieve a better life, not only for themselves, for their children, but also for their husbands. And of course, it took more than a century before society began to put her view into effect. So that's all for Wollstonecraft's legacy.